Hi guys, welcome back. This is Dr. Hadi here and welcome back to my channel Medical Glow by Dr. Hadi. In today's lecture, we will discuss another most important topic, and that is enzyme inhibition. This topic is very important for those students who are doing M.phl or PhD, because those students who are doing PhD or M.phl in enzyme, he or she must pass through these ideas. He or she must know the enzyme inhibition, because this is a very big area in the research. In today's lecture, we will cover the concept of enzyme inhibition, the types of enzyme inhibition, reversible and irreversible inhibition, but most preferably in today's lecture we will discuss reversible inhibition only, while the irreversible inhibition and other types of inhibition will be discussed in the upcoming lectures. So in today's lecture only reversible inhibition will be there, that is part 1. So let's start with the inhibition of enzyme. The process in which the activity of an enzyme is blocked. Let's suppose, come to the general concept here. This is an enzyme. We know very well this is an enzyme, and this is a substrate. Anything on which the enzyme acts is called substrate. When enzyme substrate combine, then what will happen? This is our enzyme E, and here the substrate will be attached at this point. You know very well, this is called the active site. Now this is called enzyme substrate complex. Enzyme substrate complex. This is very important. You should know that complex, because in the upcoming time you will see this word, you will hear this word time to time, therefore it's very important. So enzyme complex, and then what happened with the help of this enzyme complex, finally the substrate is broken down, the substrate is converted into product. So I would like to write a small particle just for your convenience, okay, just for your convenience, that this is the product. I would like to write it P. This is the product, and here I would like to write the enzyme once again. So this is our enzyme. Enzyme has been used, enzyme has done its job, enzyme is now in the original form, while the substrate has been converted into a useful product. This process is called catalysis. This process is called catalysis. Mean the substrate is broken down, converted into product. We say catalysis. We say catalyzed. Okay, so catalysis. This is the reaction that normally takes place by the help of enzyme and substrate. Enzyme inhibition is when some another thing beside substrate, some another thing. Let me write this is another diagram, this is a diagram, this is another something, and I call it inhibitor. When some another thing attaches with enzyme in such a way that the substrate is unable to convert into product, means, again I'm going to write enzyme. This is our enzyme, this is our substrate, this is our inhibitor, and this one is our substrate S. Now what will happen, that this inhibitor is attached with the enzyme. It is attached with the enzyme anywhere, okay, fine, anywhere. Let's suppose it's attached here or somewhere. When this is attached, the substrate will not be able to convert into product. So you can say that reaction has not taken place. No reaction. Here we say that the activity of the enzyme is blocked, because enzyme was made for this purpose, in order to convert the substrate into product, but some other thing came and with the help of this enzyme was unable to convert the substrate into product. Substrate is still there and no product is there. Reaction has been stopped. This process in which the reaction is stopped, or the activity of the enzyme is blocked, this is called as inhibition. This is one definition. Okay, this is inhibition. But it is not necessary that inhibition is that 0% reaction occur. Sometime in book you will see, instead of blockage, you will see reduce the enzyme action. Reduce the enzyme action. You will see this sentence, reduce the enzyme action. Means there were so many enzymes, they were catalyzing substrate into product. A lot of substrate was converted into product. But with the help of this inhibitor, small amount of substrate was converted into product. So this is also inhibition. So for inhibition, you can either use what? A decrease in the rate. This is what? In the rate. Means the speed with the help of which a substrate is broken down into product is called the rate. Either the rate is decreased or the enzyme's activity is blocked. Both the cases, this is called as enzyme inhibition. This is very, very important to know. Now, this was just a general concept. Okay, now we'll come to a graph between the substrate and the velocity. You know, every enzyme has its own speed, velocity, that is also called rate. Okay, fine. So for speed you can use the word rate. When the word rate comes, means something is happening with respect to time. कितने time में क्या हो रहा है? In how many minutes, in how much time a process is happening. This is called rate. If you are walking, if you are running, so whatever distance you cover with respect to time, that will be your velocity. Similarly, enzyme convert substrate into product with respect to time. So if an enzyme is converting more substrate into product, we say its velocity, its rate is high. If an enzyme is converting less substrate into product, we say enzyme velocity is less or the rate is less. So now a graph will be made between the substrate of the enzyme and the velocity of the enzyme. Substrate's concentration, 2 mole, 3 mole, 5 mole, 8 mole, 10 mole on the x-axis. Do you know this is called the x-axis of the graph? And this line is called the y-axis of the graph. So one parameter will be placed on the x-axis, the substrate, that we write S, and around S we write 2 brackets like this. The 2 brackets show the concentration. Concentration means 2 micromole, 3 mole, 3 micromole, etc. And here velocity V. Velocity will be represented as V. When you plot a graph, you will find a line like this. A line like this. This line shows it is moving upward. Means that as you move from left to right, as you increase the substrate, I mean here 0 substrate was there, 5 substrate, and then 10 substrate, and then 15 substrate, and then 20. As you are increasing the substrate, level, the line is going up, means the velocity is increasing. You know that is 0 velocity, then here we have 20 velocity, here we have 40 velocity, here we have 60 velocity, and here we have, let's suppose, 100 velocity. 100 rate is 100. So the line moving up, it is going up and up and up. A time comes, a stage comes that the line does not move up further. It moves on the right side, just like this. It becomes straight, means no further increase. This line shows no further increase. From point 0 to this point means the enzyme rate is increasing with the increasing substrate level. So this kind of graph you will get. Actually the graph is like this. So here, let's suppose we say that at a particular substrate concentration, the enzyme rate become 100 here. This is, let's suppose this shows the 100. Let me write here 100. Let me write here 100. Okay, just bring this point and attach here at the y-axis. This point can be brought over y-axis as well as over x-axis. This point. So you can bring it at x-axis. Means at this particular concentration of the substrate, the speed is 100. If you come here, this point, what is mean by this point? Similarly, you can trace this point and attach it with the y-axis, and you can also bring it down and attach it at x-axis. Both you can do. So suppose if you bring it down straight line where it is coincide, yes, this line, this point, let's suppose it's 16. So we say at 16 micromole substrate, the speed will be, you will bring this another straight parallel line here. So this will be 80. So we say that at 15 concentration, the speed of enzyme is 80, and at 25, let's suppose this is 25, at 25 concentration, the speed is 100. Similarly, if you come here, this point, at this point, this can be brought down. So at this point, the concentration is 10 and the speed will be in between the 40 and 60. Let's suppose the speed is 50. So just notice one thing. At the substrate concentration of 10, the speed is 50. If you increase the substrate 15, the speed is also increased, the rate is also increased. As you are increasing the substrate level, the velocity is also increasing. A time will come that no further increase will take place. This straight line, this line becomes straight. It is not going up. It is going from left to right in a parallel way like this. This line shows that the rate of reaction, the speed of reaction is not increasing further. This means that this is now constant. So this is our maximum speed. This 100 is our maximum velocity. So we will call this 100 as Vmax. Vmax. 100 will be called what? Vmax. And there is one very special term, and that is called the Km. That is called the Km. I have already discussed this idea of Km under the heading of Michaelis-Menten equation. Michaelis-Menten equation. I have recorded a video lecture on Michaelis-Menten equation. You can just type and you will get this Michaelis-Menten equation. And that what is Km. But in today's lecture, I will again tell you what is Km, because it is very impossible for me to give the idea of these three things without the concept of the Km. So what is Km? The idea of Km is related with this graph. I hope you got the graph perfectly now. Now I would like to tell you what is Km. Km is nothing else. It is the substrate concentration. Km is what? It is the substrate concentration. The very first thing is that substrate concentration. Just throw out your confusion and bring into your mind that Km is nothing else but it is substrate concentration. Now, substrate concentration could be 5, 10, 15, 25. Which concentration should be applied to the Km? Which concentration? Okay. That concentration at which the speed is half of the maximum. Look, if the speed is 100, what will be the half of the 100? The half of the 100 will be 50. If the speed is 120, the half will be 60. So in this graph, the speed is 100, its half will be 50. So any concentration of the substrate at which the speed is half of the maximum. So let's suppose this is my very special point of the graph. We have many points, but this point is a very special point for me, because this point tell me that at this point the speed of the enzyme is half of the maximum. Here we have maximum speed, but here we have half of the maximum speed. This is a very special speed. At this speed, the concentration, any concentration you get, any concentration will be called the Km. So in this graph, 10 is our Km. 10 is our Km. So how will you define Km? Km is the substrate concentration. Km is the amount of substrate at half of the maximum velocity. So you got this Km, and we got the idea of Km. Now we will shift to the enzyme inhibition types. Okay, enzyme inhibition is of two types. One is called reversible inhibition, the second one is called irreversible inhibition. In reversible inhibition, I'm going to write once again the enzyme. Here we have enzyme E. With this enzyme, an inhibitor, what we call inhibitor? I. So here we have an inhibitor I. This inhibitor I attaches with the enzyme, but making a very weak bond. Here we can see that it is going to make a very weak bond. So I'm again going to write the enzyme. This is our enzyme, and substrate is also there. Yes, we have our substrate, inhibitor. Yes, this is our inhibitor, but there is bond between the enzyme and the substrate. This is a very weak bond, so I'm going to write a weak bond. So what we should write? Weak bond. Okay, this is our weak bond. This is such a weak bond that it can be easily broken, so there is a chance that the enzyme can regain its activity back. Means you cannot sleep this enzyme forever. You cannot inactive this enzyme forever. Enzyme can be blocked, but temporarily, because this bond is very weak. Once the bond is broken, enzyme is again ready to do work. So this is called reversible inhibition. It's called reversible inhibition. So what would you write? There will be weak bond between the enzyme E and the inhibitor I. In irreversible inhibition, you can take the reverse of this. Just replace weak, the word weak, with strong. So in this case, we will be having our enzyme. This is our enzyme. The inhibitor will be, of course, there, but this time there will be a strong covalent bond. There will be what? There will be a strong covalent bond. Strong covalent bond. Strong covalent bond. Strong covalent bond. So this, it means that it is now very impossible that the inhibitor leaves the enzyme. Enzyme will be inactivated forever. So you cannot write the reverse symbols like this. We usually write with a word reversible, something with reversible. We write these two arrows. Okay. Now reversible inhibition is further classified into three ways. One is called the competitive inhibition, second one the non-competitive, third one is the uncompetitive inhibition. In competitive inhibition, we have enzyme, we have substrate S, and we have inhibitor I, both. This is inhibitor I and this is substrate S. Both we have. The problem is that the shape of the inhibitor is a little bit similar to the shape of the substrate. Means they have a little bit identical shape. Both have similar shape. So they have what? They have similar shape. So in this case, these two molecules both have the tendency to come and attach at the active site. Means the substrate can also attach here at the active site. You know, this place is called active site, and the inhibitor can also be attached here. So both can attach. what will happen now? A competition will start between these two. Substrate will say, I will go. Inhibitor will say, no, I will go. So a competition will start between the substrate and inhibitor. This kind of competition will result in competitive inhibition. Let's suppose the inhibitor won. Okay, then inhibitor came here, this is our inhibitor I. So when the inhibitor come here and attach at active site, then the substrate will not be able to attach. Substrate cannot attach. So if the substrate is unable to attach, do you think some reaction will take place? No, the reaction will now not take place because substrate is not attached to the enzyme, and of course it will not be catalyzed. Therefore the reaction is blocked, and this is called competitive inhibition. How we will define competitive inhibition in terms of Km, in terms of Km and the Vmax. Up to this point, the idea was just like for FSC students, for the lower grade students. We don't usually tell them that what is Km and what is Vmax to the FSC level students. But once a student come to the higher level, then we must tell them that this can be discussed in terms of Vmax and Km. In competitive inhibition, the Km increases and the Vmax is unchanged. These two words you should remember. Km is increases and the Vmax unchanged. Look, here is the graph. And these 2 points are for you to memorize. Okay, fine. You will memorize these 2 points and I'll tell you. In this case, let's suppose we have the substrate 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and we have speed 20, 40, 60, 80, 90, 100. Okay, this is our Vmax. Fine. This is our Vmax. This is our Vmax. Can you tell me the half of the Vmax? Let's suppose I would like to write it 50. Let's suppose this is 50 is half of the Vmax. So can I write it 1 upon 2 Vmax? Okay, yes, this 1 upon 2 Vmax, this is the point. Okay, this graph which you can see is the graph of the substrate and the enzyme. The speed and substrate is on the x-axis, speed y-axis. You will get this kind of graph. Okay, fine, this is done. It has its 1 km. Let's suppose this is the point. You bring it down. So here it will be, let's suppose here is 8. So this 8 is what? This 8 is our Km. This 8 is our Km because the substrate concentration at which the speed is half. So this is our Km. This point is our Km. When this competitive inhibition takes place, in case of competitive inhibition, this graph is not for competitive inhibition. This graph is just for normal enzyme reaction. There is no competition. When competitive inhibition takes place, then what will happen? We will get another graph like this, This will be like this. Okay. Like this. This graph can tell us more ideas. What is mean by this graph, by this line? This line tell us that if the competitive inhibition takes place, then the Vmax will remain same, because you know the red line is still here. This is our Vmax. This is our what? This is our Vmax. Let's suppose this is 100. This is our Vmax. This point shows our Vmax. So in both cases, Vmax will be obtained. But the important thing is that this time, where will be our Km? If you just notice, where will be our Km? This line, if you touch it here, yes, this point, at this point the speed is half. So you will bring this point down and it will be here at almost 10 or 11. So in this case 11 is our Km. So now you can see that in initial stage the Km was 8, and in competitive inhibition the Km has been increased. So what I have mentioned, Km increased, it come here at this point, but the Vmx unchanged. Vmx is still, so our reaction will still reach to the maximum velocity. Our reaction will get to the maximum speed instead of competitive inhibition. But what will be changing? The Km will be changing in the competitive inhibition. This was a really very beautiful idea for us to know. Now we're shifting towards the next, non-competitive inhibition. In non-competitive, one thing more. Here enzyme plus substrate, that usually become ES complex. So the inhibitor is attached here. Inhibitor is attached to the enzyme, right? This is just one idea for us. Okay, the inhibitor was attached to the enzyme. In non-competitive inhibition, what happens here? In non-competitive inhibition, enzyme is there. We have enzyme. Let's suppose this is again, we have enzyme. Okay, the substrate is also there. We have substrate. This is our substrate S, and we have our inhibitor. This is inhibitor I. This time inhibitor has no relation with the substrate. Inhibitor has no competition. The active site is available, free for the substrate to come. But what happens here? In this case, non-competitive, the inhibitor attaches itself to the enzyme on another site other than active site. Means there is another site. Let's suppose, but this is some another site here. This is not the active site. This is some other site. You can call it allosteric site. This is, we usually call what? Allosteric site. Allosteric site. So you can define. Allosteric site is that site on the enzyme which is other than the active site. What happens when this inhibitor attaches to the enzyme's allosteric site? This results in a change of the active site. Look, the active site was perfect for the substrate. It was very good for the substrate. But once the inhibitor attaches to the enzyme, this changed the shape of the enzyme. They change the shape. I'm going to change the active site now. The active site become like this. The active site become like this. How can you put this shape into that socket now? This socket is changed from that shape. So substrate, it is very difficult for the substrate to come and attach here at the active site. You cannot fit it. In order for the substrate to fit at the active site shape must be according to the substrate. But now the active site is changed. It is because of that molecule. So in this case, there is no competition. The inhibitor does not want to come on the active side. He said, okay, go for, he's telling to the substrate, okay, go, you have your substrate, please go. But instead of this no competition, still substrate is feeling so difficulty to attach at the active site. It cannot. So again, the enzyme will not be able to convert the substrate into product. Once again, inhibition has taken place, but this time, this kind of inhibition will be called what? Non-competitive inhibition, because there is no competition. So, in this case, what will happen? Here, that enzyme inhibitor which you saw can attach itself to enzyme when the enzyme was alone. So this is our what? This is our inhibitor. The inhibitor can attach itself to the enzyme when the enzyme is alone. Okay, when the enzyme is alone, inhibitor can attach. And most important thing, when enzyme is already attached with the substrate, let's suppose enzyme is already attached with the substrate, active site is closed, This is so dangerous. This inhibitor can also attach itself to the enzyme substrate complex. You know very well what is enzyme substrate complex. So in case of non-competitive inhibition, the inhibitor can attach at the enzyme when it is alone, or even let's suppose I'm going to write the diagram. Let's suppose this is the diagram of the enzyme, where the substrate is attached to the enzyme, means enzyme substrate complex is already there, enzyme complex is there, but in the inhibitor can attach here as well. So you can see the inhibitor is attaching itself with the enzyme alone as well as the enzyme substrate complex. In both these two cases, the reaction will not take place. So this is called inhibition. So I'm going to write two arrows. This is for the enzyme and this is for the enzyme substrate. So this kind of inhibition, where the inhibitor can attach itself to the enzyme as well as to the enzyme substrate complex, this is called non-competitive inhibition. And now we will discuss this in terms of Km and Vmx. In this case, again, we have the Vmx here. I think there is no need to write the numbers again. And here we have substrate. This line, the green line, this is the line of the enzyme in the absence of inhibitor, means there is no inhibitor. Okay, fine. When you apply inhibitor to the enzyme action, then we will get another line. The red line is for the inhibitor. Okay, the red line shows that enzyme and substrates are reacting, but this time we applied inhibitor as well. In this case, let's suppose this line, this point, this is the point of Vmax, means at this point the maximum velocity is achieved here, and you can bring this point down here, so we can see that at this substrate concentration, let's suppose this is 25. At 25 concentration, the maximum velocity has been attained. Okay, but this red line, you know, the red line is approaching upward, means the reaction is increasing, the rate is increasing, the speed is increasing, but the speed is increasing, but the speed is unable to get this point. The line is unable to reach to this point, because this point is our maximum velocity. So the line is unable to attain the maximum velocity. Yes, it has attained velocity, but it cannot get the Vmax. Let's suppose we say here we have 100, so in this case we will get only 80 speed. So this will be our maximum speed in this case. What happened here? The maximum speed, the maximum velocity was changed in this case. You can see here. This is the difference. So what we say here, the Vmax is lowered, Vmax is decreased. So this is what we mention here. Okay, Km is unchanged. What is mean by this? Look, when the speed is decreased from 100 to 80, in the beginning, let's suppose this was the 100. Can you tell me where will be the Km for this line? For 100, if this point shows 50, let's suppose if this point shows 50, so here it will be our Km. It will be what? It will be our Km. When the speed is 80, for 80, the half of the 80 will be what? Half of the 80 will be 40. So in case of 40, what we will find here, our Vmax will still be here. Let me draw this line. Okay, fine. Okay. In this case, this will be, let's suppose this will be 40. Now see, for 80, the half of the 80 will be 40. So at 40, our line will be touching here. Now this. This point shows Km and this point shows our Km. With respect to 100, 50 is our Km. With respect to 80, 40 is our Km. So these 2 points are our Km. If you bring them down, both these 2 points will attach here at one single point. So let's suppose this is just 10. So we say that Km still is unchanged. Km is still 10. Before inhibitor and after inhibition. So that is why this, you can just draw this graph. Okay, there was some little bit confusion and the confusion has been now removed. The third one is uncompetitive inhibition. In uncompetitive inhibition, the inhibitor is there, but this time the inhibitor can only attach itself to the enzyme substrate complex. Here the inhibitor was able to attach to both enzyme as well as complex, but in this case the inhibitor can attach only to the enzyme substrate complex. This is the main difference between the non-competitive and the uncompetitive. Most of the students, when I teach them, they say, so we have a lot of confusion in non-competitive and uncompetitive. So the confusion must be cleared in that the inhibitor in this case attaches to both enzyme as well as enzyme substrate complex, but in case of uncompetitive to the enzyme substrate complex. It is also called anti-competitive inhibition. Okay, enzyme substrate is there. When that inhibitor is attached, what will be the graph? In this case, both the Km and the Vmx both will be decreased. You are going to memorize the point Km and Vmx. Let's suppose in this case this is the inhibitor line. This is the inhibitor line. This will be our Km in this case, and in original case the line, this is the case of original line. In original case this will be our Km. Initially our Km was there, but in uncompetitive inhibition the Km will come from the right to the left, means it will be decreased. If you are going from left to right, this is increasing, and from right to left this is decreasing. So the Km is now decreased. This is our Km. Okay, and another thing is the speed. Look, this graph has almost attained the Vmax, but this graph was unable to reach that height. So this graph shows that the speed has been decreased. Okay, fine. So this is a very big difference. So Vmax decreased and Km is also decreased. So you are going to write these 2 points for uncompetitive and non-competitive and the competitive inhibition. Once again, in a nutshell, we discussed today the idea of enzyme inhibition, what is enzyme inhibition, and we also discussed enzyme inhibitor. We also discussed general concept that how an enzyme attach with a substrate and catalyze the reaction. Then we also discussed how an inhibitor blocks the activity of enzyme. Then we discussed the types of inhibition. We saw that there are 2 types of inhibition. One is reversible, other is irreversible inhibition. In reversible inhibition we have a weak bond between the inhibitor and enzyme, and irreversible inhibition we have a strong covalent bond between the inhibitor and the enzyme. The reversible inhibition was further classified into 3 ways. Number 1 was called the competitive inhibition, where the substrate and the inhibitor were having similar shape. Because of the similar shape, there was a competition between them to come on the active side. In terms of the Km and Vmx, we saw that in case of competitive inhibition, the Km increases and the Vmx is unchanged. In case of non-competitive inhibition, we saw that the inhibitor can attach itself to the enzyme alone, as well as when the enzyme substrate complex are formed. In both the cases, enzyme can attach. And in this situation, what happened? The Km is unchanged, just I discussed, and also the Vmax is lowered. In third case, in uncompetitive inhibition, the inhibitor can only attach itself to the enzyme substrate complex, and in terms of Km, both the Km and Vmax will be decreased in case of uncompetitive inhibition. So this is the graph that telling us the Km, in both 2 Km we have, 1 Km and 2 Km. The first Km is, this one is for the original case and this one is for the decreased case, and this line shows that we have Vmx is also decreased. So I hope you got the idea of enzyme inhibition. See you with the next video of this enzyme inhibition, which means irreversible inhibition. We'll discuss this in the next video. Give us a smile and also pray for us. Thank you so much.